Okay, the theme of the session today is what Malaysia needs. And the question, implicit in the question, is some sort of thinking about the future. And thinking about the future is something that actually we don't do very well, compared to, for example, thinking about the past. We're good at studying history and learning things from history, but when it comes to thinking about the future, it kind of gets all a bit jumbled and vague. So there's a professor from Princeton University who has actually coined a new word called propitience. And the idea is that he wants to set up some sort of academic thinking and intellectual domain on how you go about thinking about the future, the art and science of looking ahead. So in a sense, that's what we're doing. Speak louder. That's what we're doing today. Propitience, thinking about the future. And of course, whether you're thinking about a country or a region or a city or your company or your school or your university or your home or your family, we need to get it into context. And of course, the context is the planet. This is one of my favorite pictures of the planet. You see landmass and the seas. You see the atmosphere, which kind of looks a bit thin, which might suggest some sort of fragility in the atmosphere. And you see the presence of human beings in the form of the use of electricity. And immediately you can see that lots of lights in Europe, not so much in Africa. So that tells us something about what's going on. And the context is not good. 2 days ago at Columbia University, there was this huge conference to look at the state of the planet. I don't know if any of you come across that? The data isn't good. We have a financial crisis, we have a food crisis, we have a water crisis, we have a climate crisis, lots of them around. Somebody actually said that if you're not pessimistic about the future, you simply don't know the data or you don't understand the data. So we actually have a future that is unthinkable. If you look at the worst scenarios, it's unspeakable. Or you can choose whatever word you want, horrible, really shitty. And the trouble is that the picture is actually worse than it seems, because in the business of making the world a better place, we're not very good at that either. And we're certainly not getting anywhere near the kind of success rate that is needed to actually meet all the challenges that we're facing. Somebody actually said that we simply don't know what to do. So in addition to a future that is unthinkable, unspeakable, whatever word you want, it's also a future that is unimaginable. So the title of my talk is Changing the Way We Change the World, a race against heavy weather. Heavy weather there is supposed to be me trying to be a little bit clever. Heavy weather meaning has some allusion to climate change, and also heavy weather in the sense that we're making real heavy weather about changing the world. And I actually primarily want to talk to Generation Y here. Every generation that's come before us have had their big issue, whether it was the Vietnam War, whether it was slavery, whether it was the civil rights movement. You guys have got climate change. Bad luck. Because climate change is not about climate change. Climate change is about everything. And the thing about climate change is that it changes everything as well. So unlike poverty, unlike human rights, unlike all the social justice issues that you may want to take up, climate change has an end game. You can virtually do poverty over and over and over again. Not very good for poor people, but you can just keep on going. With climate change, there is a threshold where, and we don't know where that threshold is. And if once we meet it, there is just nothing we can do in order to reverse climate change. None of us will die from climate change in the sense that we're not going to drown by rising sea levels, or we're not going to fry because it's too hot. Some people might might die, literally from heat exhaustion. But it's going to kill us because we'll end up killing each other over food and over water. As the life support systems of the Earth begin to shut down, and there are more and more people on the planet, the end is nothing glamorous like 2012 or Bruce Willis or whatever, saving the planet. It's going to be kind of nasty as all the systems kind of collapse around us. So, Generation Y, you need to change everything. Business as usual, government as usual, NGO work as usual, all needs to change. And you need to do it kind of quickly because there is an end game. So you are the most important generation there has ever been. No pressure. So, if we have a future that is unthinkable and a future that is unimaginable, we want to do this thing called prospicience. Well, what do we do? How do we start? And the first thing really we need to start is with conversation. And it needs to be a conversation like we've never had before. It needs to be a conversation that doesn't just reinforce prejudices, that doesn't just recycle all the old ideas. It needs to be a conversation taking place in an atmosphere of incredible honesty and transparency and openness and disclosure. We're not good at doing that. We're not used to doing that. And it needs to be literate. So there are some terms that we need to come to terms with, and there's some concepts that we need to understand. And one of the concepts is, of course, the word sustainability. You hear a lot about this word. If you Google sustainability, you'll get about 600 to 800 definitions. This is the most famous one, taken from the Brundtland Report, but having put that up, just forget about that. Okay? Because I've read about 600 definitions, and it's not that interesting. And it certainly is not going to inspire you to do the work that needs to be done. So there is a kind of a movement, some people call it sustainability 2.0 or strategic sustainability. I don't much care for these terms. But it's kind of a new way of thinking about sustainability. There's a great article that you can get on the net if you Google that title, which of course all of you can't see, right? Because it's right at the bottom. I'm sorry about that. It's called Sustainability is Dead, Long Live Sustainability. Written by a friend and colleague of mine, Alan Atkinson. So to make it easy, and this is how I think about sustainability, is simply a mindset that fundamentally sees the world, understands the world as a system. And understanding the world as a system is very different from understanding the world in its component parts. And we're used to thinking in components, whether it is countries, whether it is the different sectors. There's the business sector, there's the government sector, there's the NGO sector. Whether it is different issues, the economy, environmental issues, human rights issues, refugees. We're used to thinking like that, but this looks at the world in systems. And when you do that, you find that so much, if not everything, maybe not everything, but most of where we have got to is due to unintended consequences. All of us here, by coming here and sitting in this nice auditorium, thank you, Microsoft, in the air conditioning, all of us have contributed to climate change. We didn't want to. It wasn't our plan. We didn't wake up this morning and say, hey, I think I'm going to do a bit of contribution to climate change. But we have. And that's something we've got to live at. So I just want to tell you a story about unintended consequences. It's a true story. It happened not so long ago in a place not so far away. It's a story about malaria. So there was malaria. Malaria is spread by mosquitoes, as you well know. And the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, decided to get involved. And they decided to deal with malaria by spraying DDT to kill the mosquitoes. They did that. And what happens next? Not only did the mosquitoes die, but some parasitic wasps also died because of the DDT. These wasps normally eat caterpillars there was a huge explosion of caterpillars, which then ate the up roofs of the peoples. The roofs came down, so in the end, WHO had to go into the construction industry and build roofs, which they did. Of course, the people didn't like the roofs because they didn't look so good, and it was really noisy when it rained, so they then had to do the PR thing, working with very annoyed people. And then they discovered that the lizards ate the bugs with the DDT, the cats ate the lizards, the cats died, and so there was an explosion of rats, which caused typhoid plague. And this is a typhoid plague courtesy of the World Health Organization. And so what do? They then gathered a whole bunch of healthy cats and parachuted them in. That's a true story about unintended consequences. WHO, they don't do that kind of stuff anymore. They're out of the cat parachuting business. So talking about unintended consequences, and I can't remember what the next thing is. Oh, yes. So the reason why unintended consequences work happen is because we disintegrate things that are integrated. Okay? So mosquitoes, bugs, DDT, lizards, cats, rats, they're all integrated. And one of the reasons why unintended consequences has taken us to the point of putting the planet in peril. Unintended consequences, right? Climate change. Your fault. Sorry, no. Unintended. Is that we have disintegrated the economy. As every politician during an election cycle knows, it is the economy, stupid. Okay? So the global economy is basically based on taking stuff from the natural world, making stuff and selling it and consuming it, throwing stuff away and making more stuff. Some people call this linear flow economics. You take, you make, and you waste. And you take some more, and you make some more, and you waste some more. And we keep on going. And it is generally an economy that's based on exploitation. And by exploitation, I mean the neutral word. I don't mean, in a necessarily bad way. So we exploit natural resources. We exploit human resources in order to drive financial growth, in order to benefit society. That's the kind of theory. That's how it ought to work. And it is driven by indicators. So on a national level, indicators, GDP. On a company level, lots of quarterly financial reports and all the paraphernalia that goes with it. And on a personal level, whatever, a bigger house, a bigger car, whatever it is that you measure the growth of your wealth. And generally, it has worked quite well. For millions of people, they live a life of relative ease, relative certainly to their grandparents. But in some places, it hasn't worked. There are lots of people who are still very poor. Some people would say, including me, caused by the growth paradigm. And then there's no off button. So we have this, in theory, economic growth is supposed to drive development. But we have this situation where we have about 1 million people who are starving, 1 billion people who are starving, and 1 billion people who are clinically obese. So the idea that growth equals development is not true. What we have is maldevelopment, and they're people who are along the scale. So this is a difficult problem. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. And it's quite interesting to see what happens when we go from exploitation to over-exploitation. So for example, if you have a business who doesn't respect human rights and are over-exploiting their workers, what happens? Or you get some of these NGO people and activists saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, bad, bad, naughty, naughty. But what happens to the company? The company actually drives its costs down and increases its profits. And what happens to GDP? GDP goes up. What happens if you have a company that pollutes the river from its factory? You get environmentalists this time jumping up and down saying bad, bad, naughty, naughty. The cost of the company goes down, GDP goes up, and then you have another company to come and clear up the mess, GDP goes up again. So it's a great invention. You know, GDP works, it goes up when it works for society, and it goes up when it doesn't work for society. So that's interesting. This is an example of a really good, flourishing ecosystem, economy. That's a bowl of mold or fungus living off a sandwich. I actually tried to make one so that I could bring it and show you, but I wasn't very good at making mold. But here you have a really flourishing economy. They're very successful. There is no universal declaration for fungal rights, so it's very competitive. You have fungi and molds competing against each other for the resources that they live on. They're thriving until all the resources are used up and they die in their own waste products. And in a sense, that is where we're heading. And the question is, are we more intelligent than fungus? This is a tree. A tree does all sorts of things, right? It uses solar energy as fuel, it makes oxygen, it makes complex sugars, it sequesters carbon, it distills water, it fixes nitrogen, it provides habitat, it prevents soil erosion, creates microclimates, and it self-replicates. But the only way we know how to measure the value of a tree is when we cut it down and make it into paper so we can sell it. There's something wrong with our accounting system. And as Einstein said many years ago, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that is counted counts. And that's certainly something that we need to think about. So when you think about value, it's much better to not talk about natural resources. We have a Ministry of Natural Resources. We need to change that into thinking about natural capital. It has a value whether you cut something down or not, or build a factory. When you think about natural capital, manufactured capital, and social capital, as opposed to natural resources, human resources, financial growth, and society. So at 200 years ago, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we were at a situation where we had abundant natural capital and scarce human capital. There are fewer of us on Earth. And capitalism has worked really well to make this thing. How do you make manufactured capital for the benefit of society when you have abundant capital and scarce human capital? And it's worked really well. The trouble is that we're in the position where we now have scarce natural capital and abundant human capital. So the systems need to change. And it is perfectly possible to change the basis of our economy from exploitation of natural capital and human capital to restoring natural capital and human capital. But that's a really big job. And again, as I said, nobody really knows how to do all this stuff. Gen Y, yeah. Okay, so where do we need to start? We need to start with, I guess, Martin Luther King. When Martin Luther King said, he didn't say, I have a complaint, or I have a proposal, or I have an action plan, or I have a critique of a really important problem. He said, of course, I have a dream. And that is something that we need to start doing. Earth Hour today, if you're going to be out at Earth Hour in the darkness, under candlelight, it's all very romantic, you can start talking about your dreams. What are your dreams for the future of this planet, for the future of this city? And we need to dream big. Aim for the stars, you might hit the moon. But the dreams must not be daydreams, like because you just say, oh, that'd be nice. Oh, wake up, reality. So your dreams need to be linked to indicators. And what I use is to match the 4 different capitals, indicators, environmental indicators, well-being indicators, how much coffee you need every day, social indicators, and economic indicators. And then once you have your indicators, you have a whole bunch of indicators, you can aggregate them and join them up and come with a figure, make it out of 100. Anybody can do this. And then once you have your indicators, you have to then work out the systems that they all operate in. This is really interesting. And the idea really is to then innovate so that all the vicious cycles that cause all these unintended consequences are changed into virtuous cycles. So I don't know, just to give you some examples of innovation. Who's the time guy? Oh, thanks for telling me. Did you? Oh, never mind. Okay. I know it's lunch. Okay. This is a roundabout that pumps water at the same time. Brilliant. This is a plant that is actually a mine detector. You throw the seeds at a minefield, and the flowers will be different depending on if there are mines around there. Brilliant. This is a building. On the left is the building in Africa, in Zimbabwe, that uses no air conditioning because it was based on the design of a termite mound. Brilliant. This is a baby blanket that provides nutrition when the baby sucks in it and doesn't give babies Alzheimer's like other things we make. That's kind of good. That's a fabric that cleans itself, which was designed on the fact that butterflies don't need baths. That's paint. That's designed on the basis that lotus leaves always look brand new. And so this is a self-cleaning paint. This is a really cool car that has 8 motors, 2 motors per wheel. And this is a light switch that tells you that reminds you that you need to switch it off. I'm kidding about this, okay. But this reminds me of what somebody said. They said that environmentalists make really bad neighbors, but great ancestors. Because you know what they do, right? These environmentalist people, they're going to say, "You recycling? You recycling? You making your compost? You're separating your plastic and aluminium and then the paper. Is that a plastic bag? I told you about the you will thank me later." It's a real pain to have. They make great ancestors, but and so the idea is that the more people we get into thinking about innovation that restores natural capital and restores human capital, where there's very little, the less we need to listen to environmentalists telling you what you can't be doing. And of course, once you have your innovations, you then have to bring that into the mainstream, and that's going to be difficult. This is something that I use. You need to use your change agents, your transformers, so that mainstreamers can then use cars that have 8 power units. Okay, and that's how you turn dreams into reality. And it really has to be this generation. It just has to be, because there is no time. And I think this generation, generation Facebook, generation Twitter, you guys that are online with our wonderful providers, where is he? He's gone. You guys really are the best generation to intellectually and emotionally connect with the sense of place and the sense of race that we need to deal with these issues. I know we love dissing Singapore, but the sense of place that we need in the 21st century is one that recognizes that we live on the planet with everybody else. And the sense of race we need is an understanding emotionally and intellectually that there is one race as a human race. if we're not able to shed ourselves of these compartments that older people, some people, scared people want to force us in via APCO, PR company, branding, if we're not able to shed ourselves of that, we're not going to be able to do the systems thinking that is needed to really crack this problem. So, I said earlier, if you're not pessimistic about the future, you don't understand the data. But also, if you are not optimistic about the future, you don't understand the best of human nature. And what we need to do is to rise to the occasion that the situation has put us in. So Gen Y, and also the rest of you, okay, Gen X people and baby boomers, and millennials, you have to tell them they're not here, they're in the playground. But this is something we have to do. This is something that we could do, and you are brilliant. The Earth is hiring. Thank you.